Bill Laimbeer once elbowed Michael Jordan so hard in the chest that Jordan bent double at half-court, and somehow, impossibly, that was the moment Laimbeer's nightmare began. It was November 9th, 1988. The Chicago Bulls and the Detroit Pistons met at the Palace of Auburn Hills, a building that had opened only weeks earlier and already felt like a fortress designed specifically to produce a certain kind of basketball, which is to say, a certain kind of violence. The arena was loud in a way that the old Pontiac Silverdome had never been, intimate and hostile. The crowd close enough to the floor that players could hear individual voices from the first rows during dead balls. The court gleamed. The air tasted like new concrete and competition. Detroit was 29 minutes from a convincing road victory. They did not know it yet. Jordan was 25 years old and in the middle of his fourth NBA season, already a scoring champion, already a player around whom the entire tactical imagination of the league had begun to reorganize itself. The Bulls had not yet broken through Detroit's defensive wall, had not yet found the formula that would eventually carry them past the Pistons and toward the first of 6 championships. And in the autumn of 1988, that wall seemed architectural, immovable, the defining physical fact of the Eastern Conference. The Pistons were 37-12 the previous season. They had come within one game of the finals. They believed, with the specific conviction of a team that had stared at the top of the mountain long enough to know exactly what stood between them and it, that they were ready. They believed Jordan could be broken. This was not a casual opinion. It was a documented strategy. Chuck Daly had built the Detroit defense around the explicit principle that Jordan must be made to pay a physical price for every attempt at the basket, that his body must accumulate damage across a full season in the way a building accumulates damage from weather, slowly and then all at once. The strategy had a name, the Jordan Rules. And on the floor, the man most responsible for their physical application was Bill Laimbeer, 6 feet 11 inches, 255 pounds, 11 years in the league, and not a single one of them gentle. Laimbeer was not a subtle player. He was not designed for subtlety. He had been constructed or had constructed himself as an instrument of physical certainty, a player who communicated with his body in declarative sentences. He would tell you what was and was not permitted in his paint, not with words, but with the flat, unambiguous language of contact, of forearms and hips, and the specific angle of a shoulder, arriving at a moment calculated to produce maximum discouragement. He averaged 10 rebounds a game, had made 4 All-Star teams, and had a quality that statistics could not measure, which was the ability to make other players feel that the basket they were moving toward was not simply defended, but personally owned. He had fouled Jordan hard in the first quarter. He had done it again in the second. Both times Jordan had gone to the line, made his free throws, and returned to the floor with his face showing nothing that could be identified as a reaction. This was what Laimbeer found difficult to calibrate, what he found almost professionally insulting. He understood opponents who showed anger. He understood opponents who showed pain. He was expert at managing both. Jordan showed neither. He simply stood at the line, held the ball at his forehead in the specific way he always held it before a free throw, and made the shot. He made both times. Jordan never responded to physical provocation with visible emotion. His teammates had learned this about him the way you learn the weather in a city you've lived in long enough, not from a single dramatic event, but from the accumulation of small observations across time. Horace Grant knew it. Scottie Pippen, in his second season, was still learning it. What you saw on Jordan's face after a hard foul was not suppression of anger. It was something stranger and colder. It was the face of a man who had just made a deposit in an account you could not see, who had received something he intended to use and was already calculating the interest. The look that closed over his face when someone underestimated him was not theatrical. It was procedural. Laimbeer, for his part, was satisfied with the first half. Jordan had 22 points, but the Bulls trailed by 6. The physical conversation had gone, by Laimbeer's accounting, in Detroit's favor. He had altered Jordan's angles, had made the drives to the basket cost more than they normally cost, had communicated through the language he spoke best that this building and this team were not places where the ordinary rules of Jordan's dominance applied. In the locker room at halftime, he sat with the specific settled confidence of a man who has made his argument and believes the argument has been heard. What he had not understood, what he was in the process of failing to understand, was that Jordan's 22 first-half points had not been scored despite the physical pressure. They had been scored through it, around it, and because of it. Every hard foul was a data point. Every altered angle was information. Jordan was not struggling against the Jordan rules. He was studying them, mapping their parameters, identifying the exact coordinates of the space they had failed to cover. He was not competing in the first half. He was doing reconnaissance. The third quarter opened and the Pistons maintained their defensive aggression with the disciplined commitment of a team that had reviewed film, prepared a system, and trusted the system. Laimbeer was physical in the paint. Dennis Rodman was a disruption on the perimeter. Joe Dumars was meticulous in one-on-one coverage, and Isaiah Thomas was orchestrating the pace with the quick, precise hands and the wide smile of a point guard who understood that controlling tempo was controlling narrative. Detroit played defense the way some organizations run prisons, through institutional design rather than individual effort, through the patient application of accumulated pressure until the confined subject adapted his behavior to the structure built around him. Jordan did not adapt his behavior to structures, he dissolved them. 6 minutes into the third quarter, with the Pistons still leading by 4, Jordan caught the ball on the right wing and Laimbeer stepped out from the paint to meet him, communicating with body language the same message he had been communicating all night. Not here, not now, not against me. He had his forearm up, weight forward, the posture of absolute defensive conviction. He had done this 100 times in 100 games, and the result nearly always was a hesitation, a passback, a renegotiation of the offensive intention. Jordan did not hesitate. He drove left, which was the direction Laimbeer's positioning was designed to discourage, into the exact corridor the Jordan rules designated as most costly, and he drove it at full speed, without the pre-contact deceleration that most guards employed to protect their bodies, the way you slow down before an impact you expect. He went directly into the contact. He invited it. And then, in the specific instant Laimbeer's body arrived to deliver the familiar punishment, Jordan was already past him, a half step ahead of the collision, his body finding the seam in the coverage with the unerring spatial intelligence of a player who had mapped the defense so thoroughly that its moments of maximum commitment were not obstacles but opportunities. He scored. The crowd reacted with the specific noise a hostile arena makes when the thing it was hoping would not happen has happened anyway, a noise with frustration in it, and also something adjacent to acknowledgement, the involuntary recognition that the play was extraordinary, even if the player was the enemy. Laimbeer stood where Jordan had left him, his forearm still slightly raised, the defensive posture now a tableau of the wrong conclusion. That play was not the climax, it was the announcement. What followed in the next 6 minutes was the systematic, methodical dismantling of a defensive philosophy by the person that philosophy had been designed to contain. Jordan scored 12 points in a stretch that the Detroit coaching staff would study with the grim attention of engineers reviewing the failure of a structure they had believed sound. He went through contact 3 times without flinching. He drew 4 fouls. He made the free throws with the mechanical serenity of a man removing bricks from a wall one at a time, without rush and without drama, simply continuing until the wall was no longer there. With 4 minutes left in the third quarter, the Bulls tied the game. The Palace went briefly and uncomfortably quiet in the way arenas go quiet when the certainty that sustained them has been publicly revised. Laimbeer was at the free throw line at the other end when the score tied, waiting for the Bulls shooter to attempt. He stood with his hands on his hips and his head turned slightly toward the Chicago bench, and in his face was the beginning of a calculation that had no good result. He had done what the system asked. He had applied the pressure the system specified. He had executed the strategy with the professional precision of a craftsman who had practiced his craft for a decade. And the man the strategy was designed to contain was standing at mid-court with 34 points, having turned every physical punishment of the first half into a fuel source that was now powering the third quarter at a rate the strategy had not accounted for. The system had failed. But Laimbeer was not yet ready to say the system had failed. He fouled Jordan again 40 seconds later. It was in the cold language of tactics the correct decision. Jordan was attacking the paint, and a foul in that situation prevents a potential three-point play and forces him to earn the points from the line. By the metrics of the strategy, it was sound. By the metrics of the actual evening, it was the moment Laimbeer went from being a tactical problem to being a narrative conclusion. Jordan took the ball from the official and stood at the line. He bounced it twice. He raised it to his forehead in the specific preparatory position he had used for every free throw of his career. The elbow in, the wrist cocked, the ball sitting in his palm with the casual authority of an object that has been in exactly this position 10,000 times before. He looked at the basket. The palace was loud and then briefly quiet, in the way that a crowd goes quiet when it wants to will a miss, when it leans its collective intention toward the shooter's hands. He made the first one. The crowd noise returned, urgent and hostile. He caught the ball from the official again, bounced it twice, raised it to his forehead. The palace made its noise. He made the second one. Bulls by 1. 3 minutes left in the third quarter, and something had changed in the building that had nothing to do with the 1-point difference on the scoreboard, something that everyone in the arena could feel, but that no statistic would record. The Pistons had come into the evening with a system designed around a specific theory of Michael Jordan, and that theory was dissolving in real time, and everyone in the building understood that once it dissolved completely, it would not be reconstructed. Remember that the Pistons had built an entire defensive architecture around breaking Jordan's will. This was not incidental. This was the central project of their season. And here, in the third quarter of a November game, with Jordan at 36 points and accelerating, that project was being evaluated and found wanting not by a rival coach or a critical journalist, but by the player himself, who was his own most devastating critic and his own most compelling rebuttal. Laimbeer fouled out with 5 minutes remaining in the fourth quarter. It was his 6th foul, earned over the course of an evening that had accumulated its own kind of testimony. He walked to the Detroit bench and sat in the folding chair reserved for players in foul trouble and watched the remaining minutes of the game with the comprehensive stillness of a man who has been removed from an argument he was losing. His teammates continued without him. Detroit's coach Chuck Daly ran his substitutions and called his timeouts, and managed the game with the professional composure of a man who understood that some evenings were teaching evenings, that the loss of a single game was not the loss of a season, that the Pistons would have many more opportunities to apply their theory. But Laimbeer sat in his chair and watched Jordan continue to score. And in his expression, visible in the broadcast footage that was captured that night and has been stored in the public archive ever since, was the beginning of something that would take him years to fully process. It was not simple athletic disappointment. It was the more complex experience of watching a theory you have built your professional identity around come apart at its structural joints, not because the theory was stupid or the application was poor, but because the person the theory was designed to constrain had simply decided, somewhere in the quiet of his own interior, that the theory was not going to be allowed to work. Jordan finished with 47 points. The Bulls won by 5. The number 47 is in the box score. What the box score cannot contain is the quality of the experience, the specific texture of what it felt like to be Laimbeer in that building on that night. To have committed your body and your professional philosophy and the full weight of your physical authority to a strategy and to have watched it fail from a folding chair while the player it was designed to stop continued operating at an altitude the strategy was never going to reach. There is a photograph from after the game, taken in the hallway outside the Detroit locker room of Laimbeer in his street clothes, his equipment bag over one shoulder, walking toward the bus. His face in the photograph shows nothing dramatic. He is not visibly devastated. He looks like a professional athlete after a loss, which is to say he looks like a man who has filed the evening away and is already preparing for the next one. But there is something in the angle of his shoulders, in the particular forward set of his jaw, that suggests a man carrying more than an equipment bag. He would carry that evening for the rest of the season and the seasons after it, not as a wound but as a reference point, as the clearest possible demonstration of the principle he had spent years refusing to accept, that there are players in the history of any sport who exist outside the parameters of the systems designed to contain them, who do not adapt to pressure but convert it, who receive a hard foul in the first quarter and begin, in the same moment, The process of converting its energy into something the person who delivered it will spend 40 minutes regretting. Jordan was already in the shower when Laimbeer sat down on the bus. He had said in the quick post-game availability he gave to the Chicago media that the team had competed hard, that the win was important, that he was happy with his rhythm from the free throw line. He spoke in the practiced, deflecting cadences of a star athlete who knows that the interview is not where the important communication happens. He did not mention Laimbeer by name. He did not describe the physical contact as meaningful or as a factor in his performance. He answered the questions that were asked, and then he was done. And the reporters who were there would say later that there was something almost unsatisfying about his composure, something that made you want him to be more visibly affected, because his equanimity in the aftermath felt like the most complete possible confirmation of what had happened. He was not relieved. He was not vindicated. He was not angry after the fact. He had made 47 points and he was already thinking about the next game. This was, and remains, the quality that separated Jordan from every competitor who was talented enough to understand him clearly, which is to say from everyone who ever played against him at his peak. Other players converted their best nights into memories. Jordan converted his best nights into standards. The 47 points against Laimbeer and the Pistons became not a peak to look back on, but a floor below which he would not permit himself to fall. One more layer of scar tissue laid down over the accumulating structure of his competitive identity, hardening it, raising the threshold, expanding the interior architecture of his expectations until the building inside him had no ceiling visible from any angle. Laimbeer would go on to win 2 championships in the next 3 years, which meant he did not lose the argument entirely. The Pistons would find ways to beat Jordan in the playoffs for the next 2 seasons, would use the Jordan rules with the patient, expert application of craftsmen who believed in their tools. But there would come a year, 1991, when the Bulls broke through, and the thing that broke through was not just a basketball team with better pieces. It was a player who had absorbed 11 November evenings like this one, 47-point demonstrations of a principle that was slowly becoming undeniable, who had converted every Laimbeer elbow and every Jordan rule and every defensive system designed to humble him into the load-bearing material of a will that could not be reduced to a strategy, because it was not a strategy. It was a condition. Laimbeer knew this before almost anyone in the league would say it publicly. He knew it in the way you know the things you refuse to say, in the body, in the specific quality of the silence that followed Jordan off the court in November of 1988 and continued to follow him through the years that came after. The championship that arrived for Jordan in 1991 did not surprise Laimbeer. It surprised people who had only watched the games. Laimbeer had felt the architecture being built, one November night at a time, from the inside of the structure Jordan was being constructed against. The measure of what Jordan was is not in his scoring averages, though they are extraordinary. It is not in his championships, though they are defining. It is in what he did with the things his opponents tried to use to stop him, in the specific alchemy by which he took the physical punishment and the tactical systems and the public skepticism and the private contempt and converted all of it, every single piece of it, into the dense, pressurized material of a career that remains, decades later, the reference point against which excellence in his sport is measured. Laimbeer gave him elbows. Jordan gave him 47 points. And then Jordan went home and added the evening to the foundation. The Pistons, for all their toughness, all their collective intelligence, all their physical authority, were trying to win a game. Jordan was building a monument. And you cannot beat a man at a project he has not told you he is working on. That is the lesson that lives inside an unremarkable November box score, inside a final of 112 to 107, inside the 47-point line beside number 23. The lesson is not about talent. It is not about physical gifts or tactical intelligence or the specific mechanics of a pull-up jumper in traffic. The lesson is about what you do with the things that are done to you. The lesson is about the decision, available to any human being in any arena, to receive a hard foul and then quietly, without announcement, begin the process of conversion. Every opposition you have ever faced was building a case against your capability. The only question is what you intend to build with the material it provides.